guys, welcome back to my channel. So I am very excited about today's topic. Color and color theory is very much close to my heart. My background, as some of you may know, is in painting. That's what I studied in university and hold my degree in. I mostly use oil paint and mixed media, and some of the classes that we took were about color theory in art and design. I did touch briefly on some basic concepts about color theory in a recent video about eyeshadow blending, and I did receive quite a few requests to delve a little bit deeper and explain how to avoid muddiness and how to warm up cool colors and all kinds of things that definitely relate to color theory. My hope is that by creating this video, you will be equipped to tackle any color on the whole spectrum of colors and be able to rock it on your face. So I suppose the very first question I should answer is, what is color theory? I would define color theory as an understanding of colors and color relationships, as well as deliberate use of that understanding to create specific color stories. By having basic understanding of colors, their relationships, and how they work, you'll find that the days of muddy color blends are over, and you'll be able to take just a few different colors and create the entire spectrum of colors. Honestly, all you need are 5 things. You need the primary colors and black and white. In the makeup world, so often it's about experimenting. It should be a fun, experimental, self-expressive process and different for each one of us. But if you have a couple rules of thumb that you keep in mind about the use of color, you'll not only be able to create pleasing color stories and seamlessly blend, create harmony, but what I think I bring to the table, and anybody that comes more from the art world would be able to bring to the table, is this idea that it's not always about pleasing color stories as it is just understanding fundamentals of colors in order to manipulate it, and you can create dissonance. You can create things like an emotional response. You can create cultural specific looks that speak differently to different cultures. You'll be able to create narrative looks that tell a story, and you'll be able to effectively guide the eye of your viewer. And like I said, you can be using color theory for all kinds of different things, to create a glam look, to create a really natural look, fool the eye into thinking whatever you're putting on your face is photorealistic and very natural, like you woke up that way, for color correcting, for special effects. It all comes down to understanding color and knowing what will happen if you put different colors together. Okay, so there's a couple little terms that you might find interesting to know. The first is shade. Shade is whenever you have your base color and you mix it with black. So shading is the action of adding black to your color to create shade. Whenever you have a color and you add gray to it, that's called a tone. And a tint is whenever you have a base color and you add white to it. So another term I'm sure you're familiar with is saturation, and that just means how intense your color is. And in our case, we would refer to it as opacity, how much of your skin is covered by your product. And the great thing about makeup is translucency in makeup. Every single makeup product has some translucency. It's actually a gift because of the layerability that you have from makeup. The idea of high saturation is appealing to a lot of people. They think that the higher they saturate their photos in Photoshop or on Instagram, the better their pictures will look. And the same with makeup. A lot of times I'll see people put layers of thick opacity on their eyes or anywhere else on their face, and a lot of times they're not doing themselves any favors if their goal is to create harmony and a pleasing aesthetic, because your eye needs rest areas. Another word is value. Now this refers to how light or dark a color is. Think pink versus burgundy. So by keeping in mind things like saturation and value, shading and tints, you can have one color be an entire range of different hues. You have a whole world, and not only do you have a whole range of hues, but you have different types of colors from those few things, such as neon versus pastel versus jewel tone versus, I mean, there's all kinds of different effects that you get, especially with makeup, because it comes with all kinds of different finishes. We're going to talk a little bit about composition a little bit in this topic, just because color theory has a lot to do with composition, and composition to do with color theory. They kind of go hand in hand. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the color wheel. These three colors right here, the primary colors, every color you can think of is essentially made of these colors plus white and black. The colors that you create from mixing all three of these colors is very much similar to black, and it's essentially brown. To prove that, I will swatch all of these together for you. It's red, yellow, blue. So that is the color I get from mixing these particular versions of the primary colors. So essentially, you do get this middle ground color, this neutral, that is very dark. So any neutrals that you have are within this center range. Every neutral is within here somewhere. Now what happens when you mix red with yellow, or yellow with blue, or blue with red? You get your secondary colors: green, orange, and purple. So these three would be your secondary colors. Those are the shades that you will get from mixing primary colors together. Now if you mix a primary color with a secondary color, you create a tertiary color, which are some of my favorites. You get shades like chartreuse, magenta, and burnt orange, citrine, aqua, and the color of blueberries. Now something that you'll hear all over the makeup world of YouTube is cool tones versus warm tones, and which family do you like better on your skin tone, and blah blah blah. Well, if you're wondering, the color wheel is split down the middle. Cool tones consist of this half, and warm tones consist of that half. So purple, blue, green all reside in the cool tone family, and red, orange, yellow reside in the warm tone family. You'll also hear things like a blue is a warm toned blue, or you'll hear cool tone gray or warm tone gray. It gets a little more complicated the more neutral you go. And those undertones are something that we'll talk about in a second. Another thing you'll hear a lot of people talk about is complementary colors. Essentially, the complement to any color is the color that is directly across from it on the color wheel. So red's complement is green. Our Christmas themed complement pairing, purple and yellow, is a complementary pairing. Blue and orange, the colors of my school, those are complementary colors. This also includes tertiary colors, and so on and so forth. Whatever color you choose, there is a complement. So let's jump back to this idea that when you mix red, yellow, blue, you create a deep, almost black. What happens if you mix complementary colors? Colors such as orange and blue. Those are complementaries. They're opposite from each other on the color wheel, right? People always say complementary colors look so nice together, right? I think they look beautiful together. A lot of institutions, websites, brands use complementary colors to create an identity for themselves because they almost vibrate. They really are opposite to each other and make the other color look even more of that color. But what happens if you mix them? We've got brown. So why did we create brown when we mixed our complementary colors? Let me show you what will happen if we do red and green. If you think about the color wheel, what is our secondary color made out of? Two primary colors, right? So in this case, green is made out of yellow and blue, and now we've got red in the mix, right? So of course we're gonna make a version of brown depending on the ratio and the undertones of the colors that we're mixing. We can create two different kinds of brown. Any complementary pairing, you're going to create a different kind of brown from those two particular colors and the ratios of the colors that you chose, but you're always going to create brown or some kind of almost black grayed out effect. And that's just because of this idea that these three colors mixed together create that version of brown. And so when you create a mixture of complementary colors, you're basically mixing those three colors together in some special ratio. So when you talk about pigments, it's very, very difficult to find a true primary color. Especially in makeup, almost every color you pick up is going to have some ratio of all three primary colors in there. Even a color that looks fairly vibrant probably has a little something mixed in, giving it a neutral cast. You might see this color and think, oh yeah, that is a mixture of yellow and orange. But in reality, it has blue somewhere in there too. Just a dash. Every color you pick up is going to lean one way or the other. It's going to have a bias towards one direction of the color wheel. So let's say you picked up this chartreuse color and you want to create a cool tone look with purple. Now what happens if you try to blend these colors together? Because they're not complementary colors per se. You know, green and purple, the complement of green would be red. We're not in the red range. Would these two blend nicely together? Could you blend those two and create vibrancy? The thing is that every color you pick up is going to have a bias. So you have to think about what the undertone of your colors really are. In order to keep clean, vibrant colors, you need to mix shades that are biased towards each other on the color wheel. This particular green shade, while it is green, is leaning towards yellow. You always use your clean, perfect primary colors as your dead center marker. And if you compare your particular shade to your dead center primary marker, and you see that it has just a little bit more yellow in it, that means that essentially this shade can only vibrantly, cleanly blend into yellow or true green. And just the same as I said, it's very, very difficult to get a true primary pigment in anything that you use, including makeup. This purple, as much as it looks like your clean secondary color, purple, it does have a red lean to it. So if you blend this out, I think you'll be able to see what I mean. Along those edges, you can see that pink undertone, that reddish nature that it has, and pulls ever so slightly towards that red. And this is a good example of a warm leaning cool tone. What happens if you got the green with a warm leaning purple? You're getting closer and closer to becoming true complements and pointing away from each other on the color wheel. And you are more likely to create brown when you mix them together. In the center here, we've got a grayed out brown. So essentially, if you want to create clean, vibrant colors, you need to mix shades that point towards each other on the color wheel. They should essentially want to make the same secondary color or tertiary color or whatever color in the middle. As you see here, I'm mixing shades that are biased away from each other on the color wheel. So what happens when you mix them together is not quite as vibrant a purple as you might expect. Again, we have two colors that are facing away from each other on the color wheel, a cool toned yellow and a cool toned red, and the mixed result is a sort of terracotta type of shade, not quite as neon orange as the color wheel on the right. Now sometimes you want to stick to these bright, vibrant colors, especially with makeup, but sometimes you're going to want to dull colors down and create depth of color and create neutral colors. Neutral colors look good on pretty much everybody, right? Knowing whether or not the colors that you're mixing are going to stay vibrant versus dull down is essential. Just to continue demonstrating these ideas, I have here a base of hunter green, and one of the questions I received is how to warm up green shadows like this, army greens. And if you are looking to add red straight away, I would recommend an orange base red for a yellow base green like this one, just because they at least have the yellow in common. Otherwise, you will have a blending that's even more muddy around the edges as what we are getting here. On the other eye, I'm showing how I would generally go about warming up a green eyeshadow look. I would probably go ahead and use a yellow base neutral to blend the edges of this yellow base green shade so that everything still looks clean and isn't just turning into brown. If I wanted to continue to warm up the color further by making it red like the other eye but still keep it vibrant, I would then go in and add hints of that red instead of going directly into the red without the yellow transition shade. Now all of my examples are exaggerated. I'm mixing everything from primary colors essentially, so these are demonstration purposes, but the same rules apply to neutrals. It's just all about spotting what the undertone of your neutral actually is. Switching over to a cool toned green, blue leaning green, if we use that same shade that we used on the other eyeshadow, it has such an orange pool to it. It definitely turns into a muddy brown color, right, when you mix them together. With looks like this, I tend to like to blend out the edges with cool tones. If you do really want to warm it up, I would transition from cool tones to warm tones. On the outer edge, we have more of a neutral green that can blend into whatever because it's basically brown anyway. But in the inner corner, we've got a vibrant lime green. And if we're going to bring that orange close to the lime green, it's going to mix as if it was essentially complementary colors, because that orange is so red leaning and that green is green. So what I would do is think a little bit ahead and stick with my yellow, because we've got yellow in common with what we have already, and use that as a transition to bring in the red, but always sandwiching it with the yellow so that the red isn't mixing directly into the green unless they want to get brown. That being said, using the complementary color as a deepening shade is a common practice and expected in most traditional painting, and I feel like it works really well in makeup as well. Makeup has a beautiful translucency to it. When you layer complementary colors, it's not always muddy. It can be used beautifully intentionally. In this berry eye, I opted to use green to deepen out the look, to create a nice brown as opposed to using straight black. And I think it turned out really nicely. I am demonstrating the differences that you can get from one color based off of the base that you lay down. Because makeup has that beautiful translucency, your skin tone plays a big part in how the colors will show up on your skin. For somebody like me who has a lot of redness in my skin, if I go in with a green shadow, my skin is already canceling out some of that green tone. It's mixing with my natural red tones, which is the complementary color to green, and creating a brown just from mixing with my skin. By laying down a white cream base, I'm able to get a true interpretation of the green, or a brighter version. If I had laid down a black base, it would have been much darker, clearly. When you use a cream base, it doesn't mix with powder products. You guys know this is just layers. So now I'm showing what happens if you lay down a powder white base as opposed to the cream white base. It will have some mix with the color that you lay on top and create a sort of neon, or, you know, if you keep blending it, a pastel. So there is a strong difference between what kind of base you use, but essentially you can be basically color correcting your skin tone depending on what your skin tone is and what color you're putting on top of it. If you want a really, really vibrant color to show up on you, your best bet is probably to use some kind of base. So we're going to talk about color harmonies, color families, color worlds, whatever you want to call them. And within that, we're going to talk a little bit about compositional rules of thumb. So if you're ever looking at a color palette that has all these crazy looking colors and you're like, I don't know what to pick, I could throw them all on my eyes, but I really want to have a professional looking look, you can remember these color schemes. So the first color scheme you can keep in mind and utilize is monochromatic. If you have a monochromatic look, you're just choosing one color. A single color can actually have so many different hues in it because of the things that we said: saturation, value, tint, all of that can create huge range, as well as whether it's cool tone leaning, warm tone leaning. You're welcome to mix and match within one color family. And like I said, with makeup you have different finishes such as shimmery, glittery, matte. All of those different finishes can make one single color look like a ton of different colors. Now traditionally in painting, monochromatic color schemes are generally utilized for really atmospheric types of works, narrative situations, something where there's one single subject. For compositions that are focused on shape, texture, depth of color, and in our case, contouring and highlight and skin and bold looks that really make a statement. Think editorial, where there's a focus. Monochromatic looks is one surefire way to really stretch your technical abilities to create depth, contouring, and use of texture, because when you're only allowed a single color family, you have to focus on those other things, and you can really see where you might be relying too much on using different colors to create that depth for you without stretching your true range of shading, if that makes sense. If you ever are wondering about whether or not that's the case in your own looks, if you take a picture and you turn it black and white to be able to see and evaluate whether or not you utilize texture and the depth of your colors to the fullest. Now the second color family that I'm a huge fan of using is analogous colors. In that color story, you're basically utilizing colors that are adjacent on the color wheel. So let's say your focus is blue and you want to pull in greens and purples those would all flow so naturally together, and that would be an analogous color story. Those types of color stories are used a lot on websites and things where people want to create a peaceful color scheme. It's also very reminiscent of things in nature. Think things like green and blue. They tend to be very natural together. Another color scheme is a triadic color scheme, and that's when you use colors that are equidistant from each other on the color wheel, such as the primary colors or just the secondary colors, orange, green, purple, and so on and so forth. With color schemes such as that, I find that it tends to be a little bit harder to blend together, and they also tend to really need some neutrals to anchor the look. If you start to go equally vibrant in all three colors, I would never suggest doing equal amounts of each color, because you really need to focus with a color scheme like that. But if you do, it can start to look very childlike, which isn't a bad thing actually if you're using the primary colors or something, but it needs to be intentional, essentially, because we're starting to get into that cartoonish, sort of surreal, childlike area. And that's where you really want to utilize subtlety in the colors that you're choosing, really starting to tone down some of the colors and properly use shading and a varied amount of saturation, etc. What we were talking about earlier, complementary color schemes. We talked about this, right? So it's basically using opposites. Orange and blue, yellow and purple, blurple and citrine. Those types of colors that are complete opposites from each other on the color wheel. I would not use the shades 50-50. I would choose a focus and let the other color be the foundation that you softly execute, and have one of those colors be vibrant. And those types of color schemes are very predominant in things like school colors, flags. They're good for creating iconic looks, but you do want to be careful. Like we were talking about earlier, when you start mixing those colors together, you get brown and shades of brown. And like I said, I think the one that has that really big punch of color should be used quite a bit less than the other color that is softer. Use it more. You can break all the rules. It's just good to know them so that you can conscientiously break them if you want to. In this example, I'm showing you how I would meld the two complementary colors together with a bit of red just to keep all things vibrant. Now we've got split complementary. So with a split complementary look, it's very similar. One complementary shade is extended. So let's say we've got the orange and blue, like my school. You could have blue, but also incorporate red and yellow and orange. Or, you could just do blue and then use an orangey red. Start inching towards one side or the other. Split complementary is often used in contemporary design for things like pamphlets and stuff. It's a very solid color scheme because it's not as expected and not quite as harsh as straight up complementary, and can really round out a look. And then we've got double complementary or tetradic. It's basically two pairs of complementary colors. I kind of did a little something like that on my eyes today. We've got orange and blue complementary, and I also pulled in purple and yellow. Because we've got the purple and yellow, we also have a tiny bit of green because yellow and blue kind of mix together, but it's essentially a tetradic color scheme anchored with orange and blue and yellow and purple. Whenever you have a double complementary color scheme, I do not recommend using 25% of each color, just like I wouldn't recommend using 50-50 in a straight up complementary scheme. In a lot of narrative work, people use one set of complementary colors for the foreground and another set of complementary colors for the background to create this mood. You could do, you know, cool tones on one side, warm tones on the other. Whatever it may be, it's often separated and there's still a focus. Make sure that you're not overwhelming the eye, unless that's what you want, by using 25% of each color. You want the eye to always have somewhere to rest. Otherwise, it generally is a look that can be quite overwhelming and harsh. In order to create a cohesive look, you're gonna always want to bring back colors that you used in a subtle way. So let's say you've got an orange lip and you've got blue eyeshadow. If you only have those two shades right where those are and you don't bring anything back into the cheeks or anywhere else on the face, it may not feel cohesive because your eye has nothing else to bounce back off of. It's almost like an important piece of information that was never backed up or that was never mentioned again in a story. So a good rule of thumb to create a cohesive look is just to bring a hint of that color somewhere else in your look if you only have it in one place and there isn't a whole lot of it. Alright, love bugs, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down below. I would love to hear from you. And if you have any special requests or any further information you would like me to include in a later video, please let me know. And don't forget to give me a big thumbs up and subscribe. Join the Cake Face family if you haven't already. Alright, love you lots, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye, guys.